All right, welcome back to the Founder-Led Marketing Show. In today's episode, we talk to Anurag Gupta, who's the founder and CEO at Shoreline. And in this episode, we explore the founding story, why he decided to leave a really good job as a VP at AWS to start this company, the fifth or fourth company that he started, lessons that he's learning as he's growing it, how they got their first customers, how they approach selling it to mid-market and enterprise as a startup. I hope there's something in there. I hope you enjoy. And without further ado, here's Anurag Gupta. Thank you for joining, Anurag. I think, obviously you're the founder and CEO of Shoreline. Maybe you can just, as a little intro, give like a little intro about Shoreline, what you guys do, what problems you guys solve, and just 2 sentences about yourself, maybe what you did before starting Shoreline, so people have a little bit of context.
Sure. So Shoreline is basically tries to provide the last mile for production ops. Everybody's got observability tools. Everybody's got incident management tools. But after your observability tool alarms about an issue, after it's assigned to somebody, the process becomes totally manual. And so that's the problem we try to solve, that we try to automatically create runbooks with GPT, generative AI. We have a curated set of runbooks, I think over 200 at this point, hopefully 1,000 this time next year, to really give people the tools they need. We help them pinpoint issues so that, because diagnostics is the hardest part of live issues. And then, almost half the issues that people run into are straightforward and mundane. And so we help them automate those away. So that's the core of what we do.
Would you say, sorry, just maybe for people who might not be in your industry and don't know runbooks and automation, is it a fair kind of summary that you help people, companies who have major services hosted in the cloud, so AWS, Azure, to improve uptime and availability of these services, so that when they go down, they're up faster, it happens less often, etc.?
That's exactly it. And a lot of the thesis for Shoreline emerges from my prior experience over 8 years at Amazon Web Services, where I ran database and analytics. And, that's where I really learned the difference between operating a service and shipping software. Because if you ship software, it's somebody else's problem to keep it up. If you run a service, it's yours. And you really, start to understand and share your customer's pain, which in the long run is a good thing, but in the, it certainly creates another burden. No one cares about your features or performance if it isn't up.
So maybe that's a good way to talk about that founding moment. So you were 7 or 8 years at AWS in a very senior role. Was there like one aha moment that you had? Was it like a slow kind of realization that there must be a better way? Was there something like that for you?
Well, I guess the real moment for me was the difference between how AWS and the other hyperscalers, Azure, GCP, manage production and our customers do, how they do it. The dirty secret of the cloud is that customers spend almost 5 times as much on the people to manage their cloud infrastructure as the cloud infrastructure itself. And it's not like anyone's saying like, oh, my cloud bill is too low. And so, it just means that the people costs of dealing with these things is super high. There are a lot of different aspects to that problem. I personally found that the outages were the most significant because you can't control when they occur. Might happen in the middle of the night, might happen on a weekend, might happen during a wedding, right? It's hard to say. And, it's very different than, say, controlling deployments, which are more under your own control.
So you realized the problem, but what was that moment where you said, let's spin it out and start our own company rather than trying to optimize within AWS, building something there,
Yeah, I guess over my time at AWS, it grew from about 3 million to about 5 billion, my services. And, when I started, they gave me 8 people and said, go disrupt data warehousing and transaction processing. I'd just come from Oracle, which had 5,000 people working on that problem and a 30-year head start. So, it's a bit of a challenge, right? But the thing of it is that, you got to know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And I'm much better at the creative force of, 0 to 60, building a service, getting it going and so forth, rather than being the steady hand on the tiller for something that's already at scale.
Right.
I get kind of bored by that. And I also, a lot of my own skills don't play well into that. So, the question was what to do, where to go. And, that's what led me to getting back into the startup gig. This is my 4th startup in various roles. So, I'm familiar with this world. I'm better at this stuff, I think, than, working at a bigger company.
And so do I hear it right that what attracted you to join AWS was the fact that it was almost like a mini startup within it, that, you had a small team and you had this big incumbent that you had to figure out how to kind of compete against with Oracle?
Yeah, AWS and Amazon generally is always about customers, not competition. So, the fact that, there were other incumbents there wasn't as important as the opportunity to better serve customers. So, credit to them, sort of teaching that to me. But I think the breadth and scope of the opportunity relative to, that is what attracted me to AWS in the early going. My wife refused to move to Seattle because she said, the job they're giving you is impossible to get done and you're going to get fired. So I'm not moving. She's super supportive in general, but, she really didn't think that this was going to happen.
Wait, but did she end up moving?
No, we've been in the Bay Area basically our entire careers.
Wow. Well, okay. So you saw that problem at AWS. You decided that with your kind of entrepreneurial streak that it's time to get back into the arena. How did I think you founded this in 2019. Did I see that correctly? Is that kind of what you initially started with to what it is today now, almost, 4.5, almost 5 years later, changed? Did it change in a major way? Is it basically the same idea concept that you had in the beginning?
I would say it's the same idea, although the importance of different characteristics have changed. I personally still strongly believe that automation is the answer, and what people really need is the ability to remove all of the drudgery of repetitive incidents. What I find from our customer base is that they're further behind. And so the ability to create runbooks is important to them. I even talked to Fortune 10 companies that don't really have, runbooks, that really represent what they need, which is really a challenge when people leave and new people join, because you can't control who's on call when an event occurs. That was learning the fact that they really have challenges diagnosing an issue was more so than the repair was learning. So, I think it's really about not the core idea being wrong. It's about meeting people where they are today.
And so do I assume correctly that, with your 7 years at AWS, that the first couple of customers you went to a network, or how did you approach getting those first initial users or customers?
Yeah, a lot of my customers come through either my own direct network or those of my VC investors. But finally, so they may be friends, but I don't have such good friends that they'll give me 100K to.
You don't?
No, sad but true. And so, it's so it does happen. They'll take a meeting. It hopefully makes sense to them, but at the end of the day, you have to earn the right to have their business.
Right. Makes total sense. And so, when I look at your Crunchbase, you went straight to a Series A? Maybe that's just a quirk to me, but in most cases, I guess the first step is raising a seed round. Did you skip that level?
I did. I think whether something is a seed or an A,
Semantics.
It's semantics, right? But my take is I only get to leave AWS once, and that's when I have the highest leverage within, prospective investors. So let me raise as much as I can at that moment if I give more of the company away. And that the flip side of it is that then I can focus on building and product and selling it more so than staying in that continual BC hunt, where then you're also a little bit at the mercy of what the currents around you are. Like, am I a Web 3.0 company? Am I a crypto company? Am I now a AI company?
Yeah.
Right? And you can just focus on what your customers need. So that has been, I think that was good. Now, the flip side of it, of course, is that you can get a little bit complacent if you have a lot of money in the bank. The challenge with this is to have that same degree of existential dread, almost, as someone who only has 12 months of revenue, funding, as even if you have years.
Right. So what's your approach? I mean, how did you approach this? What would you tell people? Did you do it right?
I'm generally filled with existential dread on an everyday basis.
But how do you impart it to the team?
You don't want the team to be filled with concerns about whether their paychecks will clear ever. Whether you have 3 months of runway or you have 3 years of runway, right? And it just is a distraction that is, kind of freezes them. So I think the question really is, how do you maintain sort of relentless focus? How do you minimize the work we do? And I think we did some good things there, and maybe we could have done things better. I mean, with 2020 hindsight, there are always things you could do better.
What do you think are some things you could have done better, and what are some things that you did well, if you reflect on? Because I mean, like, the reason why I focus on it is because I think that is a really critical issue, right? I mean, people talk about speed of execution is really important. So, as a founder, you might have a big drive because you have stakeholders, you have investors, you have your reputation at stake. Employees might not. So
I would say the biggest mistake was we perhaps built too broadly. Like, for example, we built a lot of metrics and ingestion and things of that nature. And then it turned out that people really just wanted their existing observability solutions and wanted us to take things forward from the alarm point. And so, I think eventually, in the distant future, we'll likely, a lot of the tech we built for doing operations at the edge will come back to help, but we probably could have delayed that work. The big mistakes are always where you had a misapprehension about what your market wanted, and you spent a lot of time building the wrong thing or the not immediate thing.
And is that just a function of not talking enough to customers, not being close enough to them? Or if you go back, how could you make yourself without not having the benefit of hindsight?
I mean, I think talking to customers is always the right thing to do.
Right.
I would guess that we did speak to a lot of them, but I don't know, even so, I think perhaps the mistake there was I was still had the AWS mindset of build big rather than the startup mindset of minimum viable product or things of that nature.
Right. So how long did you guys spend building the product versus when did you start selling it, or did you sell right away?
A couple of years, maybe 2.5 years.
So you start the company in January 2019. So like mid 2021 is when you start selling, roughly?
Yeah.
How did you decide that it was time to sell? What did you see? What was the threshold that you wanted to see before you go out into the market?
What it really comes to is when is someone willing to buy? Have you built enough that they say, like, okay, yeah, I'm willing to take a bet on you, even as your first customer.
So, but for that, you need to be selling, right? So during the 2.5 years,
so
you
you're
kept
always
having conversations.
You're always having conversations, right? You have to find out where the intercept happens.
And so once you waited, you kept having conversation, you waited until that first person kind of committed and said, yep, this is enough for me to, did you have a threshold of like, because you probably would have been able to get people earlier, you could have like offered a lower price tag, you could have ordered like a free pilot for 6 months. I don't know, like, right?
Yeah.
How did you decide that? What was the threshold that someone, did you have like a number in your head that only once people are willing to pay this much, we know that there's something there?
No, not so much. It's more just that for people to trust you to change their production environments, I mean, that's a very high bar.
Right.
It's different than observability. It's different than deployments. It's a more challenging problem to set off solving. I would argue it's a more valuable problem to set out to solve. So, which is why there's hardly anybody else in the space. But
Right.
I think if my take was if I can do it, then hopefully over time it becomes hugely valuable. But I didn't have a problem with the early days being difficult.
How do you have any advice, startups selling into mid-market and enterprise, right? If you don't have that PLG motion, you don't have that free trial, you don't sell a $7 per month tool, but you sell large ACV deals into mid-market and enterprise, and you are that startup, you don't have a track record, you don't have any case studies, you've not been in market long. Are there anything you feel like now that you've sold a couple of these deals that you would tell founders who are in that kind of difficult situation on how to approach it?
Interesting question. The challenge with doing the PLG motion or the open source motion or something is that you can feel successful even though you're not successful. Like I've got 100 customers, I've got 200 customers, I'm feeling really good, but I'm making, at your $7 a month, 1,400 a month.
Yeah.
The question really is that are you better off trying to have 10 customers and $1 million of revenue, or are you better off having 10,000 customers and $1 million in revenue? I mean, they're both hard problems. What you have to figure out is which is the easier problem for the particular product you're trying to sell to the particular market to which you're trying to sell. I mean, could I have sold like runbook, automated runbook generation at $7 a month? Maybe, maybe I should do that now. I don't know. But the point, is that I think it is a very different motion. I don't know that people will easily deploy automated repair into their infrastructure without a lot of kicking the tires.
So if a company decides they're going to go that sales-led route, they're going to sell into mid-market and enterprise, how do you get that first deal? Like, did you have to offer massive discounts, like super tight SLAs, promising the world? Or is it just like keep trying, and eventually
No, it's all of that, right? Because, and I think, early customers get great deals.
Yeah.
That's really the reason also to work with a startup, right?
Mm.
Because, I remember talking to a large customer in my last startup, and we were competing with another incredibly well-funded startup as well as Oracle for that deal. And, but we're the only ones that completely did 100% of the POC. And, I remember in my closing comments to them, I was saying that, look, Oracle doesn't really care whether you're successful. Most IT projects fail, but I will promise you that we will die before you're unsuccessful, because your success is our success.
It's your lifeline.
Yeah, exactly. And that's different from other people. And, you need something, we will rush out and build it for you, right? I mean, now that can feel always a little bit desperate to a customer, right? But that is finally the reason for people to work with the startup, because you're getting that leverage and working with incredibly talented, passionate people who want nothing more than to spend 16 hours a day working on your problems.
How do you think about when you get those first initial customers and, they're big accounts, so they make up, all of your revenue or a majority of your revenue, and the types of requests, feature requests, recommendations that they have, what of those are valuable customer feedback to just build a great product, and what of those might lead you down a path where you just build a custom solution for this one enterprise customer that then you don't have a repeatable process there?
We never build custom one-offs. Everything we do is basically learning from somebody that could be applied to somebody else. It's just what we're getting from them are the fine details of how to build, for example, approval workflows. Now, I mean, there is one of our customers has 30,000 nodes under management, a couple of 100,000 containers. We had to do some special stuff to scale to that, to that scope. Right. I don't know when other people will, rise to that scale, but, I think the fact that the ceiling is high gives a sense of comfort to people with, 5,000 nodes, right?
So the question is basically, if I build this feature that they're requesting, is it something that I can roll out to all of my customers and they will all benefit, or a majority of them, versus what is something that's super unique to just their use case and I won't be able to roll it into the product?
Well, I mean, I always roll everything into the product. The question is, there's a difference between, is it relevant just to this one customer right now? For example, that scale point, versus is it something that will be relevant to future customers as well? Right. And that's where, like sort of the truly bespoke things become, in general, we don't do.
Right. Makes sense.
I mean, obviously there's a customer side aspect to that as well, right?
How did you think about customer profile? One of the things people say that you need to define your ICP. Did you going into this had educated guesses? Did you talk with a bunch of different verticals and industries and you just saw what stuck? How did you approach figuring out who might be able to get the most out of your product?
A little bit of all of the above. I mean, finally, what you do is you figure out where you're getting success and you double down on it, right? And there have been, of course, the last several years have been challenging, right? First with COVID, and next with roughly a crash in tech industry, right? So, we've had to move this way, that way a little bit, and to try to find things that perhaps were off of the the initial ICP as a result of that. But I think we're kind of getting back to that initial ICP. We'll see. I mean, it continues to be a challenging world. More startups failed this year than any time in the last 5 years.
Really? Wow, I didn't know that stat. Because of people call it the SaaS recession, right? I heard David Sachs and Jason Lemkin talk about it as a software recession. What
you want to think about there is the equity price premium over bonds. So you might have, like when bonds, the US Treasuries were essentially zero, the equity price premium is typically about 3%. So that means that
3% more than what the kind of
bond rate is, that your risk-free investment. At 3%, that means you should be willing to pay a PE of 30, right?
What's the PE?
Price to earnings ratio.
Okay.
Or at a startup, maybe it's more growth, or so everyone was incentivized to maximize their growth rate, growth at all costs, right? It was in a very rational way. Startups were getting incredible valuations. So then you suddenly get to a world where risk-free premium for treasury is like 5%, maybe a little bit higher. So now that's 8 for a stock. So that means you're at 12 for a PE. So your stock valuation has dropped by 2/3, and it's no longer, growth at all costs. because, money isn't free anymore. And so, the challenge for a lot of companies has been that their last round valuation and their current round valuation might be incredibly different, even though the company itself is doing better. That's why, if you call it a SaaS recession or a tech recession or, whatever recession, it's just a question of, the reason is that equities, particularly in high tech, were based on price earnings growth ratio, and now it's that's collapsed and won't come back until interest rates go back down.
So you raise your Series A or seed or whatever you want to call it in 2019. You raise a Series B in 2010, 2022, and I would say it's a big Series B, right? 35 million. I mean, this is all public data, and that was at the height, I would say, of the SaaS. I don't know if you want to call it a bubble, tech bubble. Did you, now with hindsight is 2020, did you have the foresight at that point that probably valuations are inflated and that probably you want to be careful with the money and not grow at all costs right now and preserve?
I would say I actually raised about 6 months later than the peak. If I'd raised 6 months earlier, I might have gotten a valuation twice as high. And so we were already starting to see, sort of the severe drop. You're going to be sitting around the table with your investors for years and years and years. So for me, the biggest question is, what is the quality of the individuals? How supportive will they be in hard times? Because everyone will drink champagne with you. That's easy, right? The question is, will they put effort in when times are tough? Or are they going to go on and spend their energy on one of their investments that's doing really well? And
how do you know that? How do you, can you interview for that? Can you?
No, you gauge for intellectual curiosity. You see what their other investments do. You see how long they stay with them. You see whether they're proud of investments, regardless of how, or their founders, regardless of whether it's the most successful founder or someone else. You see what they're looking for in you, and you just see if this is someone you would think would be supportive or not. And I think across the board, I have an incredible set of investors. Everyone's money is the same, but it's, I think as individuals, I've been very fortunate with this group.
Did you, at that point, when you raised that Series B, given that it was already down from the peak, and I don't know what your investors told you, was it already, okay, you raised a good round, let's, be careful here? Or was it still, okay, let's pour gasoline on the fire,
So we were already out of the world of, pour gasoline on the fire. We were, no one really believed in, growth at all costs anymore. I'm not the guy to be like growth at all costs anyway. So, I'm more the disciplined, let's build it right. Let's get companies happy, let's, I think in my Series B, I obviously gave customer references to them. They also back channeled with every single one of my customers. And they were shocked that they were all happy. And that for them was quite unusual. It meant that, however, badly we were doing in terms of overall revenue or whatever, we at least had product.
Now navigating this, software recession, is there any advice that you might have for founders who are maybe at an earlier stage? Maybe they raised a Series A at an overinflated valuation and now they have to live up to it, or is there anything, or founders who might just be starting, how to navigate this environment?
Finally, the most important thing is mindset here. A few years ago, let's say 3 years ago, it might have seemed like I get funded for whatever random idea, and 2 years from now, I'm $1 billion. And, there were companies like that, right? And so you can't you have to believe that it's a 10-year journey. And so there are two questions then. Do you have the fortitude? Do you have the economic wherewithal to be able to spend 10 years doing this while all your friends, coworkers, people who used to report to you are making 10 times more than you, right? And they're enjoying huge success, at later stage environments. And, are you just going to be like, okay, laser focused, this is my job, this is what I'm doing, it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. Because if you start benchmarking, that's doubt, because you'll always have a lot of doubts. And then, like on the other point is that, look, yeah, I mean, it's low tide right now, but the tide comes in, right? It goes out, it comes in. There are all these things. The question is, can you survive, both mentally, with your family, do you have enough money in the bank to get past it and figure it out? Is it tough? Yes, it's always tough.
Can I ask you a personal question then? I mean, you had, I think you mentioned this is your fourth startup, or this is your fifth startup. So you know what it takes. You just mentioned the 10 years. You are at AWS, and I'm sure that's a cushy job being a vice president at AWS. I don't want to say you're not young anymore, because it's always perspective. But at that stage at your life, thinking about, okay, I need to commit 10 years to this if I really want to do this.
Yep.
How did you think about it? Was it just no question? You were just bored at AWS? Was it, what did your wife say when you said, okay, I want to go back to starting from scratch and building a company from zero again? Like, how did you think about that life decision?
Well, I mean, I'm incredibly fortunate in having married up, and he's always
Same.
been, super, super supportive, to almost an irrational degree of all my, nonsense. I would also say that there are, to my knowledge, no cushy jobs at AWS. Everyone, but you get paid more than you are going to pay yourself, right? I've always had, I'll start with this. I've always been blessed or cursed with the fact that I know what my long-term goals are. Sometimes they shift, but I've always had clarity about them. The thing you need to understand is, if you're not on the path to your goal, you need to change your path, or you need to change your goal. Life is actually that simple. I've had that conversation with so many people who, would come to me for advice. They basically say, like, should I take this or should I take that? It's almost like they're asking a GPS system whether it should make a left turn or a right turn. The question is, where the heck are you trying to go?
Right.
Unless you know where you're trying to go, it's actually an illogical question, right? AWS was a great experience, an amazing experience for me, but I wasn't on the path to my goal.
I think there is a quote, I don't know where, but basically says, be careful where you're going, because you might actually end up where you're heading. In software, we worked with software companies. There's this whole craze about AI, obviously, after ChatGPT launched. And now every startup is incorporating AI. Every, company that gets funded nowadays still seems to be an AI company. How did you approach, and maybe also from your perspective, what was the investor expectation? Like, was it that, people said, you need to do this? Was it that you got excited? Was it that it just made sense from a product perspective? Like, talk to me about, like, how this whole AI craze affected you guys as a company and your product and your roadmap.
We started thinking about transformer models probably a year ago, which is well before GPT came out. And we got, I remember the first board meeting I had where we started talking about this. Everyone was like super confused. Like, what are you doing? And this is in terms of automated runbook creation using generative AI. The question is whether people are AI washing now, like just making their product seem AI, just like there were cloud washing in each of the generational changes.
Mm-hmm.
But or whether they're truly doing something fundamental and significant. Cohere has been around for 4 years now. They've been doing transformer models for that length of time, just like OpenAI. And so yeah, the world is starting to pay attention now, but these companies have been trying to build for some time.
So you guys already had some talks about AI and leveraging generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
When ChatGPT launched, was it a major shift of like, okay, this is real now, we need to allocate a lot more resources to that idea? Or was it already on the way and it's like, okay, now it just seems like a little bit more accepted, so we can talk about it?
The difference was that I think it made more sense to people that we were doing automated runbook creation. The quality of solution has gotten better and better and better, month over month.
Right.
So I think that's been the dominant difference, that we can build better products now than we could, a year ago, using really the same tech stack. In part due to better prompt engineering, in part due to learning, in part just due to better technology and that we're leveraging.
Obviously, founders should think about if AI can actually help make the product better, at the core, or whether it's just plastered on top to have a buzzword in there. You guys are selling into technical people, right? You're not selling into marketers, you're selling into engineers, SREs. Do you feel like putting AI on top of it helps? Or is it almost the opposite now, where it's so commoditized, everyone says they are AI powered, and that it's almost like shooting yourself in the foot?
My take is that there's a point when it's just another tool in the toolbox. Whether I'm using a crescent wrench or a socket, wrench, doesn't matter to anybody. What matters to them is it simpler? Is it faster? Is it easier? And I do think that the core of what we're trying to provide to people is that they get their problems solved faster. Their problems, not, at the end of the day, how much do they care about my tech stack underneath the covers?
Right.
They shouldn't.
Let me ask you, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm a big fan of I don't know if you know them, of the founders of Basecamp, Jason Fried and DHH and 37 Signals. And they've kind of been vocal lately about the fact that they got rid of their cloud services and actually building servers again.
Yeah.
And given that you're in that space, you have a stake in the game. I'm just curious your thoughts on that. Do you feel like that's just them trying to be contrarian? Is that going to be a real movement? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense, etc.?
I don't know. I don't know enough of the details of what they did. The question for me is AWS more expensive than getting your own servers? Yes, particularly when you can get your servers, like used at, and so forth, right? Do people underestimate the cost of actually operating servers? Also, yes. No one thinks about the expense of having new servers that they bring in, or of the data centers, the heating, the cooling, power. That's just infrastructure costs is roughly half of a hyperscaler's bill, in terms of their cost structure underneath the covers. So, if you think you're just paying, you can get things for just the 25% of getting the Dell server or whatever. Yeah, sure. That's true. There's a point at which it doesn't scale, and you might not be able to get the upgrades. You might not be able to get the H100s that they can get, whatever. Obviously AWS does have margin, right? We can all see that.
Cool. We're approaching our...
By the way, and as Jeff Bezos used to say, your margin is my opportunity.
So their margin is now other people's opportunity.
Yeah, there you go, right?
Coming back around. What is, maybe besides Jeff Bezos, because I know you study him, are there any other founders or CEOs that you're following, studying, learning from?
Not so much. I think, my goals are not about being a better founder so much as being a better human being. I'm more, in terms of studying, I try to think about how to be a better person more so than how to be a better.
How do you define a good human being? What makes a good human being?
Well, that's a really good question, right? I think it's different for each person, what they think of, but I guess, what I would say to you is, if you envision your eulogy, who is there? What are they saying about you? What is the difference you made on their lives? Because your economic successes, they pass, right? The impact you have on other people potentially can be lasting, whether in an abstract way or otherwise, right?
Are there any people then, if you don't follow founders and CEOs, is there anyone then you follow to become a better human, or you listen to or pay attention to?
Yeah, several. What I always think about are people who see a problem out there in the world and say, this problem I must solve. And you could argue founders are a form of that, right? But I remember, I met Muhammad Yunus years before he won the Nobel Prize for his work with microfinance and Grameen Bank and so forth. And, back then he told this story about, he was a professor of economics in the US, which way back then was super hard to do as someone brown, right? And there was the war between Pakistan and India, creating Bangladesh. He was from Bangladesh, and he said, I must go back. My country needs me. And he went back and he became an economics professor there. And, he decided, like, okay, let me go and take my class to the local village and try to see what is causing, people to be poor. And he realized that it's really a fundamental lack of capital. And, like, how can some woman afford to get 3 chickens that lay eggs so that, she can start the process of rising up, as opposed to, all these other things. And it was impossible to go to a bank and get a loan if you were at that layer. And that sort of was the root of microfinance. And so, if you study his career or his story, there's element after element of, like, this shall not stand. And, you can see that in a lot of the people out there that one can respect, the people who are in the civil rights movement, or people who, and, also smaller folks. Like, there are people I know in India who just, are like, oh, this particular thing is horrible. And since I see that it's horrible, I have to devote a large portion of my life to solve for it, whatever it is. And I think that ability to see things that are wrong, the necessity of fixing the things that you see that are wrong, is of fundamental importance, in my view, for, to be a good human being, as to answer the question you posed earlier. But, it's also something that I think is fundamental for founders. And that's what I think separates, like, founders who are successful as measured by monetary outcome from, people who are in it to do something that they believe is important. Finally, we measure based on outcome, right? But that outcomes in entrepreneurship are very largely a matter of luck.
Well, Anurag, thank you so much for your time. I know that you're busy, so I really appreciate it. And I'm sure there will be a couple of nuggets for people who are, a couple steps behind and just starting their company. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.